So for the next thing I want to get into is senior thesis.
Mm-hmm.
What was the process like? What was your research on? How was it being an athlete and handling the monster?
Okay, so senior year, obviously, so it was junior spring because for sociology, thesis is required. For English, it was honors, so not required, but if you did it, you got honors in the major. So junior year, I went into it. I had applied to do a combo and do one in English and sociology. That's not what ended up happening, but yeah. So right along the entire time, I kind of knew that a thesis was part of my major, which I guess was
Yeah.
basically since sophomore year, but maybe I started to like conceptualize it junior year. I knew I wanted to do something on type 1 diabetes. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and so I've always been really interested in having that be a part of my academic experience in any way that it can be outside of just the daily nature of taking care of it. But I didn't know if that was going to be possible because it's not something that's as studied as everything else. Diabetes overall, sure, a lot of people know about it, but when people say diabetes, they normally mean type 2.
Yeah.
And that's in and of itself like a whole nother thing for discussion. But I knew that I wanted to focus on that, and I just didn't know how I was going to bridge the gap between, I knew sociology could get at it, but I wasn't sure about English.
Yeah, kind of.
And so my initial idea was to kind of do a sociological analysis of maybe depictions of characters in books with either type 1 diabetes was too specific, and I did
Yeah.
a search and I couldn't find anything. So I kind of had pinned down like different disabilities, whether it be like learning disabilities or illness depictions, because like historically you could see things with people that were like cripples.
Yeah.
Like the biggest one I think that comes to mind, if people know like Shakespeare, it's like Richard III, and being
Yeah.
that he was kind of born disfigured and crippled. And typically how those are associated with really evil characters and kind of how they're not the round characters or the
Yeah, they're
evil,
not the-
pointy, misshapen, edgy people. And so I went through the process, and like both are really rigorous, but English felt especially so because it's not something everyone does. So it was something you had to propose to, establish like that it was feasible, and then it was only a select few of the major that were doing it because not everyone wants to, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But also trying to make the two match together, that was probably like in and of itself was a mental health struggle I faced senior year. Is I was just not happy with what was happening with the topics. I felt like I was sacrificing something I had wanted to study so long because the literature wasn't giving me.
It wasn't what you.
It didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I also was having a really hard time because doing 2 theses meant I only had 1 class, and I was like living off campus. I was like, oh gosh, I'm never here.
Yeah.
And I love class and I like independent work, but having it be one class versus 2 is a whole nother beast because especially 2 like humanities classes are sometimes once a week, sometimes they're twice. Like
So you're barely
here.
barely a student.
And fall wasn't a time that I had softball, so I was like, what am I doing? I love being in the library. I love having work to do with people. And I was in full crisis mode. I was like, oh gosh, it feels almost like sophomore year again. What am I doing? And it was really hard for me because I felt like I was failing by saying this may not be best for me. But I was really lucky. Professor Goldner ended up being my thesis advisor for sociology because her specialty is medical sociology. So it just was a nice overlap.
Yeah, nice. That's perfect.
And I had Jen Mitchell in English, and Professor Mitchell I'd had for so many classes, and she was super interested in what I was working on, and I felt like I was betraying her to just say, like, you know, this isn't what's best for me, and it took a lot of my friends talking to me and being like, Karson, like, 1, you're miserable because you're just not here, and it's hard, and then 2, like, you don't like, you're not losing any value as a person to just be like, I don't want to pursue 2 theses. Like, you're already doing 1. And in hindsight, I'm like, oh my goodness, I was really worked up about that. But in the moment, I was like, oh, like, it would make sense. Like, I've always been very excelled in English. Like, everyone who's doing a thesis is people, like, I always have class with, and we're kind of like our little cohort in English. And we took the English seminar that you need to take thesis. And I was like, oh gosh, this is part of my identity. Like, what am I doing? But ultimately, I decided to not pursue it. And it was, you know, at first I was like, do I have to bow my head when I see these people? Because I'm not going to thesis seminar anymore. I'm going to class. And I felt like, oh gosh, how's Professor Mitchell going to feel about me? And we sat there with Professor Goldner and we talked it out. And I was like, you know, this is such an important topic to me that I want to pursue it fully in and of
Yeah.
itself, and I don't want to compromise it just because the books aren't there right now. And so my topic ended up being exploring the stigma and social supports faced by college-age women with type 1 diabetes. And I loved it. Like,
That's awesome.
it still makes me smile to talk about it. It's still something, like, I feel very proud to say I got to do. Because one, it's me, it's who I am, it's something I experienced, but it's also something that has never been studied before. And one, it was possible. Like, my Professor Goldner was like, yeah, we can study this. Like, we can figure it out. Like, that's what sociology is. Like, we'll work with what's there, and you're going to provide the data on what's not, and we're going to make it happen if you can. And so I got to interview, I think I ended up getting 13 women to talk, and we talked for, like, probably over an hour and a half each. And that was, yes, it was hard because I wanted to interject and say, oh my gosh, me too.
Yeah, but you had to let...
Yeah, I mean, but it was amazing to get to hear them talk about things, and I could think, oh my God, like, that is so me, or wow, I haven't experienced that, but you have, and that's really disheartening. And like, just thinking about like what's been different in our paths that's made you experience those things that I haven't, depending on maybe like age you were diagnosed, or just everyone carries like illnesses differently, and some people you compartmentalize it differently. Sometimes you do associate it with your self-worth, sometimes you don't. It depends, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my project ended up being on that, and I ended up kind of finding what I thought I would find, and saying that, there were different types of social support that people were getting that they were feeling like was a protective factor in the struggles that they would face, and like in the stigma that they would face, which was, the stigma was resounding throughout, and a lot of it was just resulting out of ignorance and people not understanding the illness and kind of treating them like a type 2. You would just, the stereotypical things you think about with diabetes, but also the social supports were things that I could remember. Like, the one of them I still think of was acts of service, and I remember I texted my friend and I was like, this is what you do for me, like when you offered to put juice in your car so that when I go low there's sugar for me, or when I'm just having a day, you're like, let me just grab your bag because you have a few extra because of everything you need. And those were the things that I was like, this is just nice to put words to something I experienced, and I know at least these 13 other women are experiencing. And all of them were really appreciative after we talked. I always gave them the space to be like, is there anything else you want to say? Any critiques you have for things I've asked or in ways I asked them? Because, like, as you'll come to learn, if you interview people, like, you have to develop all the questions, and you're trying to make them open-ended and also approved by, like, the board of safety for people. So it's hard, and you're like,
it's very difficult.
You don't want to skew the answers, but you're also trying to be like
the most open and unbiased you can be.
Exactly, and that was the skill in of itself that thesis gave me. But like, it was such a rewarding thing. I looked forward to doing every interview, and when I got time to do like the data analysis of all that, it was daunting, and thesis in and of itself is daunting because none of us have ever taken a project under that's that big, and there's no written rules of like, this is how you do thesis. Everyone does it differently.
Everyone's path is different,
right? And as you're doing things, you're like, oh man, I wish I had done that part differently, but
you
just do it and you get it done. And I have to say, like, thankfully, being a spring athlete, thesis was done before softball was in full swing, so I didn't have to balance that as much. But nonetheless, like, I felt super supported throughout it all. And in the winter term, when practice is really heavy and thesis was due, it's not a set class time, so it's not like you're missing it. I was able to meet at times that felt good for me. And also, I was really uplifted by what I was studying, so the frustrations of writing and trying to figure out, for me, like, the titles I wanted to give, the patterns I was seeing, like, that is something I find really rewarding to sit down and
be able to
hash it out with someone. So Professor Goldner and I would sit there and do that for so long and just go back and forth, put 1,000 names down and be like, do we like this one? What is that implying?
Yeah.
And I loved that process, and that's kind of influenced my path a little bit in public health and things I'm looking for in a job. And that was something that was fun to do, and like, it was fun for me to get to sit there with my teammates and talk it out and be like, should I sit this way? Are you thinking this? Even prepping my Steinmetz presentation, I sat with my teammate in her car. Like, that was right after we lost in playoffs with or in Liberty League, sorry, at RPI, and I like zoomed back over here to give my presentation. But so But balancing softball with everything is like, I'm sure you feel like with football, you get used to it.
You do.
And you kind of take it for granted how much is actually on your plate. And you're just like, yeah, of course I do it. I have no choice.
Yeah, you have to do it at the end of the day. Papers got to get done, presentations.
Right. And I think my work was so much better for it because it made me get things done well. And yes, quickly, but well, because that was what I felt like I had to produce. But doing thesis with softball, really thankfully, because of the spring semester, wasn't too bad. It was in and of itself such a good learning experience that that's one of my things coming out of union. Like, that is an experience it gave me that I know at other institutions, like, you just may not have the option to do so.
Yeah.
And to work so closely with a professor that I really admire just in how she says things. I'm like, I wish I could be as cool as you and half the things you say and how you put it and how eloquent she is. But yeah, I'm very grateful for the experience. And I think to publish something that is so big and enormous and
it's
so
a huge accomplishment.
30 weeks of your time, literally, because for me, it was like all summer kind of trying to prep it, and fall and winter. Yeah. And, now I have this thing that I still get little notifications when people download it from wherever they are in the world because it's on the library website. But it's nice. Like, it's a piece of you. And I really get what people mean when they say that now, like my thesis or their dissertation or whatever. It really is a piece of you.
The extension.
Yeah, I hope you get that experience as well with whatever you choose.
I'm a little scared, but
it won't be without its bumps, but...
Yeah, that is expected.
It'll be, I think it's a rewarding thing, and I think it's something Union definitely has an edge over other schools and other programs for being able to, even though it may kind of seem like a hard requirement, I think it's something that you leave with that always gives you a talking piece.
Exactly, for wherever you go.
Right.
That leads to my next question. What are some takeaways you can come to and spread on to people coming forward about your life in Union? What have you, lessons you've learned, some small things like that, or advice you would give to a freshman or someone coming in as a transfer like you?
Yeah, I would say something I wish I had just done a little bit sooner was to just, it sounds corny, but to be your authentic self and to be able to crumble in front of others and say where you're needing help. Yeah. I think I was really comfortable doing so in front of my professors in the context of class and saying, I'm not understanding this, or I'm having a hard time on this assignment, but to go to my peers and say, I don't really have friends, or, I don't love, for me, I was like, I don't love going out. Can we do something Saturday morning? Can we go get breakfast? I think to be yourself and acknowledge your needs and to ask that of others is something that we all can do more so. Mm-hmm. And something that I would definitely recommend to a freshman, and I think I tried to talk to any of the underclassmen I came in contact with, to just say, if you need something, it's okay to say it. And it may not always get well received, or you may have to reframe how you're saying it, because you'll learn, better ways to articulate what you need. But to say, I need this, or, hey, I do want to take a walk with you, but, I really need to. Can we just chat for a second? I just need that to get through my day. And no, everyone can't always come through because everyone has their own things going on.
Yeah, their own life to go through.
But, more often than not, I think people are going to be there for you if you're really asking for it, especially, if you're being there for them. And so that's one thing I wish maybe I had just realized a little bit sooner of that.
It's okay to break out of that shell.
Yeah, it's okay to just need people, because that's what we're here for, and that's what I think Union does really well, is it does instill a community that people want to be there for each other, or it's just the norm that you are really going to look out for each other, even if you're really not the closest, or you may not swim in the same social circles. That doesn't really matter at the end of the day. If you have something, that you're just asking for and you have it in common, that it may not be a huge thing, but just a small little thing. It's something that you can form a bigger connection over. So I would say that, and I would just say to cut yourself some slack as you're learning things. It doesn't have to be perfect, and also
you're gonna wake up the next day.
Right, you're gonna wake up the next day, and it's gonna be okay. And if you change your mind from what you thought you wanted to study when you come in, I think it is hard. It kind of gave me an identity crisis of, gosh, who am I? I don't know what it means to study anything other than the textbook answers of I go to school and I study this. So that's when you got to lean on the people who are those people in those fields. Go to those professors and talk to them and be like, what drew you here? Because those things were so nice to talk about and build connections with them that I wasn't even intentionally trying to build.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is something I think I said in another question someone had asked me, but it's just to pursue things or to go after things that fill your cup up. Like, if
Oh,
you know what
that's a great
recharges
thing.
you,
Yeah.
like, go for it. Like, for me, it's taking walks. And if that was, like, everyone was in the library studying, like, I just knew I had to take a little loop here and there. Or
Yeah.
it was to not make myself feel guilty if I needed to go laugh in the dining hall or just go be silly in the library and not be like, oh, gosh, I just lost 20 minutes. Like,
Yeah, no. Think of
it's
it
fine.
positively.
Right. So those things, because then you look back and you're like, I could do my work so much better because I gave myself the things I knew I needed to recharge, and I didn't make myself feel guilty for doing so. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
That is great. And one thing I've learned so far in my path is kind of being yourself, and stop putting up a front, or reaching out to people when you need it at most.
Right.
Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Always check on some guys. I'm being in a football team. Always, hi, hey, how you doing? Just simple, ask them how they're
Exactly.
doing, sit them down for a sec, or or just being okay with, hey, something's not right, and you can do something. And there's people out there who are going to help you. You have family, friends, coaches, athletes, professors. I mean, there's a lot of people, especially here on Union, that you can talk to
Yeah,
to get
definitely.
anything out that you need.
Yeah, and I would say, like, especially speaking to other athletes, I think sometimes it can be daunting to be on a team because it can feel like this wolf pack mentality,
Yeah.
or that group mob mentality of kind of everyone thinks the same and does the same. Like, that's what I think sometimes people looking from the outside may see or may assume. But also when you're in it, you're like, am I the only one who's feeling this way? And I think, as a teammate, it's like, no, you want everyone to bring what they bring to the table because
Yeah.
that's what you love them for, and that's what makes the team what it is. It isn't because everyone's a cookie cutter model of each other. But sometimes when you're not sure exactly how you're fitting in, or you're just wondering how is best to fit in, I think we can think, okay, I need to kind of act like it seems like everyone else is.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most dangerous and honestly, like, worst things for a team, because then it loses that fact that it is this big pool of all these different personalities and all these different things that people bring to the table, as you said. So I think it's fun, and that's what, you build little inside
Yeah.
jokes with each other over. Like, for me, it was having my, like, lunchbox every day,
There you
or
go.
having, like, always having, like, something someone could borrow for, like, the shower and locker room, or whatever it was. So,
Yeah,
and then
having
it's,
those things.
yeah, like, those are the things that keep you going, and I think people, you just have to take yourself a little less seriously than everyone else,
Yeah.
and just say,
yourself
hey,
a
this
little
is me.
break.
Like, I do these goofy things, or I don't always get these things right, and this person may, but also
We're all human.
we're all human,
We're
and
all
that's
human.
what we bring to the table, and that's what makes the team what it is and what you come to love it for.
Exactly. It's a melting pot.
Yeah, definitely.
So now I want to open the floor if anything you want to bring up, questions, topics, or anything on your mind.
I don't know if you've spoken about it before, but what other topics have you done thus far, and have you seen, like, similar themes in any of your podcasts with things that have been said?
One of the most interesting things that I've noticed with doing these interviews is the athlete stigma and how they feel being an athlete on campus. Like, I know in one of my first episodes, Jack Anderson said that he felt that he had a target on his back for being a football player and athlete, walking around to class, feeling that he's not he's my roommate, a very smart guy, but somebody, the ideal of a jock
Yeah.
could be a dumb athlete here just only for sports.
Right.
But so feeling that, and being in classes where professors will tell you to take football gear off or a sports gear off because they're
Wow.
just not a fan. And
Yeah.
we've talked about how, at least in my sports experiences, a third of the people are going to like you, a third of people are not going to care, a third are going to hate you.
Yeah.
So, and I personally have felt a target on my back walking around campus, but it's a burden sometimes,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's great being an athlete and sometimes it's not.
I definitely agree, and I think I maybe push those moments down a little bit. I was very fortunate. I think being a female athlete is a little bit different for that type of stuff. And
Yeah.
I hate to say, I feel like football carries its own.
It does carry its own stigma. Yeah, that's a whole other.
For sure.
But yeah.
But yeah, like that target that you feel kind of like, oh God, here they go in their little matching outfits.
Yeah.
Or, how reckless of them to not be going to the library, to be going to practice. Like, that's immature. That's not what we do at this point in our lives. But being at the point now where I'm not playing, it's like I would kill to be able to do that again, because it didn't take anything away from my success in the classroom. It didn't take anything away from how hard I was working. It honestly just added another layer to all that I was managing, and not in a way that it makes me superior or any of us superior to someone who's not an athlete, but it just frankly is something that is a part of our identity and it matters just because it's that. And yeah, that's something I hadn't really thought about before, but I think too, it's like people, depending on, a lot of people would forget I was an athlete. Like a lot of my professors would be like, oh yeah, right, you do have practice or whatever, because I think it's like, when you're so dedicated in the classrounh, they're like,
You have nothing else
you have nothing else going on. Like,
but
well,
you have a completely
right.
other life.
And I'm like, no, we have a whole nother 30 hours to our week that are, accounted for elsewhere that we have to show up just as much for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
That another one be, I guess, just the pressures, real of being a student athlete, and maybe some people not understanding of what it's like to really, like you're getting into, like we outside the classroom, we have a whole 30 to 40 hour week that we have to give the same dedication, the same strength to, or struggle the same way in.
Right.
So that's been another interesting topic, too.
That pressure to perform is a lot.
It is. It weighs a lot.
I think it's something you inevitably internalize, and I think that's something my teammates and I would talk about so much too, is like you hold yourself to the highest standard possible. Like your teammates and your coach probably aren't even holding you to the standard you're holding yourself to. In terms of allowing yourself to make a mistake, like for me to drop a ball or to miss a pitch or whatever it was, like, but those things eat away at you, and you don't think about how much mental space, like, you only have so much, but there's so much going to school, there's so much going to your personal life, there's so much going to, okay, what am I going to eat in between practice and class and lift, and like, yes, everyone has common hour, but I have lift during common hour.
So yeah, you don't really get that time. Exactly. Right. I felt the same thing.
So yeah, and the pressure to perform, I mean, it really can, I think, eat away at your love for your sport if you're not careful, and if you're not, I know for me that was really hard. Like, I've never been one to love when people come to watch me play, because I was like, it's pressure. Gosh, what if I don't give them the show that they're looking for?
Exactly, yeah.
And it's so easy to let that get really big and to really take away from this sport, because that's the thing too, is I think if people aren't athletes, or even if they're not athletes, like it's in school, you can study so hard for a test. I could practice my swing so many times, and like you're just not going to execute.
Yeah.
And that's really hard, because sometimes it's like,
you give your best.
Yeah, I gave it my best and it didn't work out. And how do you kind of move forward from there? Do you get stuck in a slump? Like, that could happen.
Yeah, your mindset is very, very crucial in that point.
Or do you like come back the next time, and how do you kind of talk yourself back up? So I think that's something definitely that doesn't get shed on enough. And I think I was watching, I can't remember who spoke on this TED Talk, but it popped up, and they were saying like, there's no World Series, there's no like college softball World Series, there's no like any final game that people look forward to, there's no March Madness without all the student athletes that are putting so much of their time to not only their sport, but to everything else, that are choosing to add something to their plate on top of the large expectation that college already is.
Yeah, like sports is a privilege.
Right. And so I think that was a really nice thing to say, because as a student athlete, like, I don't even really give myself that credit to think about it. And like, you don't think, you're just like, yeah, I do it.
Yeah, just do it. It's no big deal.
Exactly.
It's my everyday life.
Right. So when people say that, you're like, oh no, it's not, like, it's really not that big of a deal.
Gloss it over, yeah.
Yeah, but it is. It's something I think all of us should be super proud of, and also understand not everybody's going to understand it or maybe be a fan.
Yeah, but everyone's different, and to respect their own thoughts.
Right, exactly. So that's super interesting to hear that about the stigma on campus. I think that would be neat to hear, like, women versus men on campus, kind of like how the gender stereotypes are fitting in with that.
Yeah, I've noticed, even that first episode, Haley Dean, field hockey player.
Right.
And she noticed, she's like, I don't really get that all as much, and she doesn't, and I've had a couple other, like Mel said it too, and I believe some other freshmen, I think it was field hockey players who also came on and spoke and said it's a little bit different towards them, but all the men said that there is, and that can go to the whole, depending on what sport they're playing, there's a lot of other factors that go into it. But at least what I've noticed with this podcast is that there is a difference of how people feel the pressures on them.
Right.
I mean, they all feel the academic pressure, but on a social level, the pressures seems to be very different.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely. I think, I mean, it's a whole other part of your identity that people are interested in or have preconceived judgments about. So it does make sense, but that's interesting. I hope it comes up more as you talk to more people, kind of to see how it
I've kept it
ebbs
in.
and flows.
I've kept it in every episode that I've had so far, and I plan to keep it in. It was something that I picked out, and I was like, this might hit or it might not. I'm not sure how people are going to talk about it because number one, it's a sensitive topic to the person,
Yeah.
or it cannot really come up at all. And I'm happy that I kept it in my first script, and it's been quite a conversation even outside I've had with people following up on me on the podcast and just texting out and be like, hey, this is a really interesting aspect that you don't really think of, or not, you won't know that feeling unless you're an athlete. And
Right.
it's just, that's what I'm all trying to do, is spread the light on student athletes and what it's like to be a student athlete.
Yeah, thanks.
So.
It's so great. I think it's nice because even like in the one episode I got to watch, it's nice to hear other people put words to things you're feeling because, we're all
can
limited
relate.
into how maybe we can verbalize things or we think it's just within ourselves. So to hear someone else put words to it, even if it's not the way I would necessarily say it, it's like, yeah, that feeling of, oh yeah, me too. That it's nice to hear and to say, okay, have I felt that way? Maybe I didn't. Why? Why didn't I feel that way?
Yeah.
Or did I and I just didn't realize? So thanks for putting this together. It's so nice, and I
No problem.
appreciate, and I'm sure all of us student athletes appreciate you giving some limelight on it, because I know, like you said, some people may be like, why? Like, what's the purpose of
Yeah.
it? But I think it serves a great purpose to talk about something that I think more and more we're starting to recognize the importance of mental health, especially in athletes.
Yeah.
And we still have a really long way to go in
It
terms
is
of addressing
just the beginning.
how much goes on and how much maybe how many gaps there are maybe in the ways in which we could help each other and maybe institutionally like learn how we can support student athletes as we move forward in time.
Exactly, and I want to thank you and all the other people who have come on and spoken, given a little bit about their life. It's not that easy, talking about your journey. And at the end of the day, this podcast is for you guys. It's for you guys to tell your stories and talk and have a conversation that needs to be had. So, and
Thank you, Joe.
thank you. And one of the ending things I want to mention for Union College campus, we have Doc Wally's office and Lower Alumni Gym. You can always go out and reach to him. I have myself. He's a great guy. Really will help you talk through any situation that you need.
Yeah.
The Wicker Wellness Center, they have the Upper Wealth Counseling. Inside of it, you can reserve a private room if you need to do work, if you need a couple minutes to chill out and not talk to
Yeah.
anybody, or they have therapists there if you do need to. They also have the dogs. You can go walk
Yeah, they're
around for an
great,
hour.
yeah.
That's an awesome experience.
Great. Yeah, Wicker's great. I was a user. They're very helpful.
They're awesome.
Yeah. very
And
helpful.
then it comes down to simply as your teammates, coaches that you're with, friends and family. They're going to be with you through thick and thin, no matter what. Probably your closest extension from
Right.
yourself. So I think this wraps it up. Thank you for coming on again.
Thank you so much for having
And,
me. I appreciate it.
No problem, and have a good night, everyone. Thank you.